Hi YouTube, thanks for watching my channel. Today I am back to hiding in my attic to the point that it is now going to be the Attic Historian channel because I'm noticing a trend here. I'm trying to let my kids sleep in and not wake them up. But today I want to talk to you about the Enlightenment in America, which is a really fun topic for me. This is one of the other topics that I ended up researching a while back for one of my classes. And I don't know what goes through my professors' minds when they read my papers, but they're probably shaking their head like, where does she get these ideas? The answer is I don't know. They just come to me. But if you're not familiar with the Enlightenment, it was a intellectual, philosophical movement during primarily the 17th and 18th centuries. You do have little bits of it kind of starting before then, and then it does continue into the 19th a bit, but primarily 17th and 18th. So it's usually associated with the French. Of course, the French are considered more radical, but there were Enlightenment thinkers throughout Europe, Russia, Germany, and England. And I was shocked to find out there's apparently a little bit of debate about whether there was an English Enlightenment, which baffles me because the English had John Locke, they had Thomas Hobbes, they had Newton, they had plenty of clearly Enlightenment thinkers. So how we can say there's not an English, I don't know. Some people also say there wasn't an American Enlightenment, and that is what I'm here today to talk about. More specifically to Rousseau, but clearly the Enlightenment had a heavy impact on the colonies because we can see its influence all through our founding documents, in the Declaration of Independence, in the Constitution. It's there. It was on their minds. Because the Enlightenment, what it gave us was reason. They were skeptics. They thought about everything. This is where we get the sciences. I mentioned Newton. So everything that had been accepted for so long, now they're challenging it. They're saying, well, wait a minute. I don't think people thought this through. They're challenging human rights issues. So this is when we would get the idea of natural rights and how everyone, go to our Declaration of Independence. When Thomas Jefferson is writing about, well, the whole thing, it is this massive thing on human rights, on natural rights, and all of this comes from the Enlightenment. Obviously, I get a little emotional about this topic. Anyway, moving forward. And I don't want the Scots to feel left out because Scotland had David Hume, and he was huge, so kudos to them. But right now I'm going to talk about Jean-Jacques Rousseau. He is French. He was radical. He was very radical. So when I first decided to write on him and his social contract theory in America, what I found, it's always these research rabbit holes that get me, and I'm like, what is that? But I came across this book by Henry May called The Enlightenment in America. And it was one of the few sources I found that tackled specifically America, because people trying to say that we didn't have an Enlightenment, trying to act like it's all Puritan ideals. No, it was not. Thank you. Not that the Puritans didn't have a significant role in our history, but no, our founding documents did not come about just because of Puritan thought. It did not, no. But May asserted that Rousseau, being French and being very radical, was just too radical for Americans, and that his ideas had to arrive indirectly. And May wrote, quote, "Englishmen in America read the same books Englishmen read at home, a little later and somewhat selectively," end quote. I'm really not sure what his thought process was here. And I enjoyed the book. I'm not trying to downplay the book. But, he specifically said that Rousseau wasn't popular here. And he specifically said, well, it's because Englishmen here read what Englishmen back home do. But really? If I remember correctly, I think Rousseau actually lived in England, maybe it was Scotland, for a little while to escape France. So, No, don't get me started. Anyway, what I'm about to do is show you evidence that Rousseau did influence thought in America. And I'll just jump to that. I'll get past that little tangent I was getting sidetracked on, and we'll get back to it. And to kind of set the stage, John Locke, one of the most popular English Enlightenment thinkers, and he was very, very popular within the colonies. And Paul Hazard, in The Crisis of the European Mind, he compared Locke and Rousseau by saying that Locke burned with a gentler flame, and Rousseau set fire to everyone who approached him. Which is fair. Rousseau was radical. Yes, he was. But he was also practical. Because throughout his writing, and I'm thinking primarily of On the Social Contract when I say this, but throughout that book, he would explain his ideals, he would explain his theory, but then he would kind of walk it back, and he would say, this is my ideal, but this could work in this situation, this could work in this situation. So to just dismiss him as radical, I think we're doing history a disservice. We're doing studies of the Enlightenment a disservice if we just say, oh, he's a radical, and move on from there. But Rousseau's works first arrived, as far as we know, in the colonies in 1762. And from there they spread. Now in the 1760s, John Adams was reading Rousseau, and he later, in writing Edmund Jennings about a potential constitution in Massachusetts, like a state constitution, he wrote, quote, "No government was ever made so perfectly upon the principle of the people's right and equality. It is Locke, Sidney, and Rousseau, and Mabley reduced to practice in the first instance," end quote. So right there, Adams is putting Rousseau right up there next to Locke. And from some of Adams' other writings, he didn't seem to agree with everything Rousseau said, which is fine. But you can tell that he had a high regard for Rousseau's writings. He recommended it to his wife Abigail that she read it. He mentions it frequently, or at least numerous times throughout his writings that I was able to find. And in 1793, there was a John Breckinridge who crossed mountains in the colonies with 15 volumes of Rousseau in his saddlebags. And I don't know quite how much you can fit in saddlebags, but I know if I was traveling over mountains and had to store things in saddlebags, I'd only be putting important things. I mean, if I could be putting extra clothes or food, I'm not putting 15 volumes of a writer in my saddlebags unless he's being appreciated in the colonies. Rousseau was a favorite of Aaron Burr. He was read in South Carolina by Francis Kinloch. He was read by Noah Webster, Benjamin Rush. He was read by students at William and Mary during the colonial period. So you can say controversial. You can say he's radical. That's fine. But don't pretend that he was ignored in the colonies, because clearly he wasn't. Dr. James Cutbush. This is an example that I had a lot of fun tracking down. He was an assistant apothecary general for the United States Army during the Revolution. He went on to become a professor at West Point after the war, and he was a pioneer in chemistry, specifically explosives. So I think he was probably a pretty interesting guy. Yeah, we're going to work with healing sick people, and we're going to work with blowing things up. Cool. But he gave a 4th of July speech in 1818, and he mentions Rousseau. And it's funny because I came across this in like a footnote in an archive of some other founders' writings, and I could not find a copy of the speech anywhere. I tried to get a copy. It was in this old newspaper that it was published in right after the speech. And I went to my university library. They couldn't find it. Nobody could find it. I ended up going on a genealogy website, and then going into the newspaper archives as if I was looking for an obituary because I knew which paper it had been in and the date. So I tracked it down that way, and I was just so excited when I got a copy of it. And, in addition to mentioning Rousseau, he says in this 4th of July speech, quote, "The social contract or state of society becomes advantageous in its mutual operation, where we all possess something and none of us too much," end quote. So that line he doesn't specifically attribute to Rousseau, although he had just mentioned Rousseau, but it's really interesting, and it makes me think that he was a student of Rousseau. He did enjoy studying him, because when I had read Social Contract, there was a line in there that this reminded me of, and that was where Rousseau writes, quote, "No citizen should be so rich as to be capable of buying another citizen, and none so poor that he is forced to sell himself," end quote. And frankly, I think that line is beautiful. I appreciate the free market, but I do think that we have to show compassion. And I just think it's kind of cool the way that he phrased that. And clearly I'm not the only one who thought that. If someone else who is, active in the revolution and all, and obviously well regarded, if he's keeping the same idea in mind. Another fun one, and I mean, this is just a mention, but I find it, I'm like, well, wait a minute, people are obviously thinking about him. So we have notes, we have Hamilton's notes from when he was preparing for New York's ratification convention. I think it was for the Constitution. And in his notes, he put, quote, "Democracy defined by some, Rousseau, etc." end quote. So basically he's just reminding himself what to cover, kind of like the notes I have in my hand. And so he wants to talk about what democracy is, and he could have mentioned any philosopher to quote, to cite, as far as, defining democracy. But his first thought that he wrote down was Rousseau. Moving on. The 6th President of the United States, John Quincy Adams, the son of the aforementioned John Adams, in 1842, so a little later, they're reflecting on events, he gave a speech. And in this speech, he says, quote, "The principles of Sidney and of Locke constitute the foundation of the North American Declaration of Independence, and together with the subsequent writings of Montesquieu, I think that's how you pronounce it. That's what happens when you learn by reading instead of hearing. Anyway, with the subsequent writings of Montesquieu and Rousseau, that of the Constitution of the Commonwealth of Massachusetts and of the Constitution of the United States," end quote. So, how do you credit Rousseau in any clearer terms as far as the founding of our nation, the founding ideals of our nation, than with that? I'm only really quoting a few examples of things I found, but honestly, I'm not sure how you can hear these or read these and not come to the conclusion that Rousseau made an impact. And going back to Henry May in his The Enlightenment in America, I had mentioned that I thought some of what he said was kind of contradictory. And that continues, because in another place he says, quote, "Rousseau's direct effects on Americans are the hardest to document," end quote. Yeah, I think that when you have philosophy, when you have ideals like this, thoughts being shared across continents, yeah, sometimes it can be hard to trace it. But I do think that with what I just shared with you, if I do say so myself, I make a pretty compelling argument that he did make an impact. I cannot tell you what it was exactly. I don't think any historian can tell us that without being able to actually speak to the founders and asking their opinions on how much they were influenced. But from what we have, I think it's fair to say that Rousseau and his radical French version of the Enlightenment made a considerable impact. And it also kind of goes to show the wide range of thought that our founders were interested in reading and considering that went into play when it came to founding our country. You know, the formation of the United States. And in these videos, I might sound very, very critical because I prefer to stick with the facts. I prefer to look at history as it was and admit our shortcomings, admit things that this country did that we should not be proud of. But in acknowledging that, we can also be very proud of the things we did do well. And I think it is very, very special to be able to see how these men and women, you know, Abigail Adams had some influence, and I mentioned Mercy Otis Warren in the other video. Getting tongue-tied here. I'm not discounting myself or my sex when I say this, but our founders were very special. They didn't do everything right. They didn't get everything perfect, but they were able to consider ideas that before them had just been theory. We'd gotten little hints of it. You know, we'd had some things in English history where the people had asserted their rights. But really the United States, it was new territory. It was something that had not really been tried before. And it's lasted quite a while. So I would just like to salute the influence of Rousseau and the Enlightenment in where we've gotten today. I hope you enjoyed it. If you have any questions, comment below. I would love to do some more videos on the Enlightenment. Rousseau was kind of an obvious choice for my first, but if there's something else that has always interested you and you want to know more, let me know what that is. I will probably be expanding on this later. Thank you for checking out the channel. Please like, subscribe. I do plan on putting out more content as I have time. Say hi, Finn. Say hi. This is Fenrir. He is the youngest of my three, and he is also the biggest cat I've ever had in my life. And his mama is the smallest cat I've ever had in my life. You ready to go hunt mice again? Yeah?